Hello, hello. Welcome to AMAZE Live. I am Christine Koh. I don't know if I'd say I'm the host of this thing, but I'm helping AMAZE with Facebook Live because I love them and I work with them. And I'm so thrilled to have Fadra Nally on the line here. Hello.
Hi, Christine. How are you?
Good. I'm so delighted to see your face here. I saw your face like briefly in person like a month ago at Mom 2 Summit, but it was so brief, which was so.
I know, it's always like this. Yes.
Yes. And I'm really, really excited to have you on also because, we just started, just for context for people who will be joining soon and also for you, we've just started these Facebook Lives with AMAZE as a way to just introduce people to the community, to, sex educators, smart authors, and to highlight real parent voices and, challenges. And you are our very first parent voice. So I'm really excited. Yeah. We just, we exchanged a couple of really interesting emails after Mom 2 Summit because I wanted to introduce you to a couple of the AMAZE folks there. And I was just, you're always candid, which I love. And I was just really struck by some of the things that you wrote. So I wanted to dive a little deeper in today. So I'm excited about that.
Great. I am too.
So yeah, I have just a couple of questions. If you see me looking at my screen, that's why. One of the things that I was really interested in with your email is you talked about parent roles in talking to kids. And you said, my son is 11 going on 30, and there are so many things that I thought Dad would be there to explain, and that didn't kind of work out the way you had thought. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
So I think it really comes down to parenting instinct. So let me just clarify. My husband and I are married. We've been married for a long time. He does travel for work every once in a while. So I'm definitely the more present parent, but not to do him a disservice, but I think I just have better parenting instincts. That's probably the nicest way to put it. I have to remind him sometimes, yes, he is 11 going on 30, but he's still 11. He's still a kid and he's still learning. And it's our role as parents to teach him things. Like, you don't even think about the things that you need to teach them sometimes. Like one day I looked in his closet and his shirts were sort of like all weird on the hanger. And I said, do you know how to properly hang a shirt on a hanger? He's like, no, not really. And then I felt like the dumbest parent in the world because I just thought, you just, put it on the hanger. So It's things like that, you don't always think to teach them. And so, we had something come up recently where he wanted to get dressed up for school. He wanted to get a suit jacket. He wanted to get a dress shirt. He wanted to get a tie. And I put it on my husband and I said, that's all you. This is total guy department. And they just never really got around to going to the store doing it. So I said, fine, let's go. And I figured, I roughly knew about neck measurements and sleeve measurements. And then thank God for YouTube so that I could figure out how to tie a Windsor tie. So, we don't really have gender roles in the family. I have had some things where I've said to my husband, like, this is guy territory, but it doesn't always end up that way.
Mm-hmm. So do you remember what that sort of first sex ed related puberty, whatever conversation topic was that you hoped your husband might address with him? Yeah.
So we sort of had this deadline that we were approaching because in our school system, it's really funny because when I was growing up in 5th grade, we had a whole unit on family life and they separated the boys and they separated the girls. And now they do it for 2 days, 1 day in 4th grade and 1 day in 5th grade, which frankly is just not enough, right? And they only talk about puberty and changes to your body. They don't talk about sex at all, which I thought was sort of surprising. So we had this deadline approaching where I knew that they were going to be doing this family life talk in school. And, you never know how much they know and what they learned from their friends or what they picked up from watching TV or YouTube or whatever. And so, I wanted to make sure that I had a talk with him before he watched the outdated video in school and they had the talk.
Right.
So we just had a casual conversation in the car and I said, so do you know about this and do you know about that? And the car is a really good place to talk because you don't have to stare at each other. It's sort of like You have distractions out the window. It's very non-confrontational, very casual. And it was really funny because I had this conversation where I said, well, do you know about, and I think I was talking about, I didn't say wet dreams, but that was essentially that was the thing that I didn't want to talk about, but I wanted to make sure he knew about it. And so I brought it up just real casually, and I said, I just want to make sure you're comfortable with that. And he's like, yeah. I said, well, you know about it? He goes, yeah. And of course, I thought, oh my gosh, did my husband actually have the conversation with him? No. What had happened was probably a few months prior, I was at a store and I picked up a book. I think it's called The Boy's Body Book.
Okay.
Right? And I brought it home for him, and it was like a really approachable, fun book. I brought it home for him, and I said, hey, I bought this for you. And I know I'm backtracking here, but there's a good punchline to this story. And, I brought him home the book, and he wanted nothing to do with this book. I don't want the book. I'm not going to read the book. Get rid of the book. Like, very aggressively opposed to this book. And I said, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to leave it here for you in your playroom. It's there if you have questions. If you want to look at it, great. Nope. Didn't want anything to do with it. So flash forward a couple months later, we're having this conversation in the car. And I said, you know about some of this stuff? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, how did you know? He goes, I read that book you gave me. And, so when you think that they're resistant, they're not listening, they're not interested, they are. And I like, that was my proud parenting moment. Like, he read the book, I got him. Great. So
that's awesome. I have a couple thoughts. I got to just try. I'm writing things down. That's why I was getting a piece of paper. So first, I think that's awesome. And I think just leaving the resources around for kids is really critical. I'm going to link up the Boy's Body Book in the comments after we finish this broadcast. And also I'm going to link up one of AMAZE's very popular videos is about wet dreams. So and one of our first videos was about boners, and it's like one of the most popular ones. So, and actually also you reminded me that one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years working on this project is that there tends to be, I think I learned this from one of our sex ed experts, that girls tend to be more receptive to like books being left around, when they're seeking information, whereas boys tend to want video. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't know, how much your son has, watched educational videos, I know, other than the outdated ones at school, but I thought that was an interesting distinction.
I mean, I think that's a very good point, because he is all about YouTube, and not just for the stupid videos that, of course, boys watch, but I mean, he watches TED Talks all the time. So he does go to YouTube for educational videos. And so when I looked at some of the videos that AMAZE has, I thought, this is great, and this is exactly his style. And it's one of those resources where you can say, here it is, if you want to look at it. It's not one of those like, let's sit down and watch it together and talk about it. It's a resource for him. Yeah, where he can go and he can do that. And I think it's great, because I don't think that there are enough resources. I think, my experience, and I write in the parenting space. I've been in the parenting space since my son was 3 years old. And everybody is all about babies, toddlers, even elementary school children. And then you do see a little bit of a shift towards teens, usually when it comes to driving and maybe alcohol. But there's this big gap of knowledge that I think is missing. And so I'm thrilled to see, the tweens and the early teens. It's such an important age. It's such an impressionable age. So, I think it's a really important time to talk to your kids about everything that you're afraid to talk to, whether it's alcohol or sex or whatever. These taboo topics, you need to talk to them.
I can't agree more. Total sidebar. I think we should totally blast out this niche, because I completely agree with you. I have a 13-year-old. I feel like there's the younger stuff, and then there's like the amazing women who run Grown and Flown, which is more like, older teens into college. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think there is a whole. Two other comments. Well, first, I wanted to just pop up or encourage. I see people joining the broadcast. please, drop a comment, or if you have a question for us. We are talking about real life parent sex ed challenges, so we'd love to hear yours. I want to share Jennifer Johnson. She writes, "Thank you so much for your videos. I love how they also talk about bullying, consent, and LGBTQ. My son watches them." I think that, yeah, which is great. Hey, it's also Pride Month, so that's wonderful. And actually, that's one of the things when you were talking about how the family life programming at your school was just about puberty, like, it is a little mind-blowing because there is so much more. And actually, that's, one of the great things about the AMAZE videos is there's the mechanical stuff, but then there's also like relationships and what is sexual assault and, some really deeper things. So, yeah. And then one other thing I'm going to link up, I'm making all these notes, is that I don't know if you've seen on the site, but if you haven't, or anybody else who's joining us, is actually you can set up like a playlist and then just like text it to your kid, which is kind of awesome. Yeah, because that way they don't, you can just you can sort of decide what videos like might be sort of good for them right now, and then like they can like deal with it at their leisure, which is pretty great. So I'm curious about communication. I'm always curious about communication. You had referenced that, your husband travels a lot and maybe isn't always the greatest communicator. Do you have any tips, for our parent community here of like, how have you guys effectively bridged that? Or, you know what I mean? I mean, it's very, very challenging. I mean, it's challenging to communicate with one another and then to figure out how to get on the same page to convey something to your kid. So any hacks there? It's kind of a big question.
You mean getting the other parent to communicate, or just communicating with your kids? Some tips for how to better communicate with them?
I guess I would say like working with your partner to figure out how to communicate. So to like get past the sort of typical gender, like, okay, the dad will talk to the son or the mom will talk to a daughter or whatever. Like, how have you guys bridged that in your household?
So, I mean, for us, listen, I feel like everybody comes with their unique skill set, and we're all shaped by the way we were raised as children, so, my husband, very close with his mother, not a great relationship with his dad. So I look at his father-son relationship, and I know that shapes the father-son relationship he has with our son, unintentionally or intentionally or whatever. So I know that comes with challenges. And I think what you have to do is you have to look at what are the strong skill sets of each parent and who is good at what. And the other thing that I do, and luckily I have a husband that's open to it, is frankly, I coach him. And I need to remind him, my son tells me that I have a kid heart, which is like a huge compliment. And to me, that means I can relate. I feel like it wasn't that long ago that I was 11 years old, although it was a long time ago. But, I kept diaries when I was a kid, and, I still remember the angst that I felt when I was he's going to middle school next year. So I remember the angst that I felt. And so what I try and do is I try and coach my husband, and I try and tell him, hey, I pull him aside privately. This happened today at school. Maybe you should go and talk to him about it. Or, like last week he was out of town and he went to, they do a field trip to the middle school to kind of like a preview of what's to come. And I told my husband, who was, he was in California at the time, I said, this is kind of an important thing for him. So why don't you call him and ask him how his day went? And so, my husband's receptive to that. And I'm okay with my role being to help him be a better communicator and learn what is important to my son, because I'm closer to my son and I know him better. So if I can help my husband figure out how to bridge that gap, then I'm going to do that.
I can't agree more. And I will say, this is me bringing in my own former psychology, blah, blah, blah. And then my husband, who's a therapist. But I feel like it's all a family system, right? So anything that you do that helps facilitate that channel of communication between your husband and son is totally going to positively impact, your relationship with each other, your relationship with your son. I feel like it's all so related. And I think that's something that people can lose sight of when it's a kind of like, okay, you handle that, I'll handle that kind of situation.
Right. Yeah, we definitely share it equally. Some things I was kind of hoping Dad would cover, but it's worked out.
Yeah. Erin Lane, who we actually both know and love, she writes, there are certain topics I feel like Dad can discuss since, he's dealt with the issues. Get that? And I'm super open if my son starts the conversation with me. And honestly, that becoming, we refer to it as becoming an askable parent. Like, you want the ultimate goal. It's never going to be perfect. It is, you'll for sure stumble. You won't always know the answers, but you just want them to come to you and to keep coming to you. So I think that's really one of the most critical things. You referenced in your email that you've struggled with some topics, and I'm just curious to hear what's been hardest for you to talk about in the realm of sex, sexuality, whatever.
I'm just going to flat out say it. It's sex. I don't know why. I think because I was raised in a very conservative religious environment, and it's fair to say I've strayed from that. But so growing up that way, sex felt very taboo. So it's not something that I've addressed with my son, because he's at that age where there's I don't know who's listening, but some people don't believe in Santa Claus, and some kids do believe in Santa Claus. And the idea of older kids that believe in Santa Claus, sitting them down and having a conversation about sex, it's like this world that I can't really understand, where they've got one foot in childhood and one foot in adolescence. And that's been really difficult for me to straddle. And honestly, I think where a lot of the even the introduction to sex has come up, for better or for worse, and just being honest here, is through entertainment. We're watching movies, and here's a funny story. We watched the movie Airplane, if you remember that movie from back in the 70s, and I love that movie. Yeah. Okay. And it's rated PG. So I was like, oh my God, I love this movie. Let's watch it. Well, PG in the 70s was different than PG today. So we're watching it, and if you guys don't know it, it's this really silly comedy, and the plane starts to go down, and chaos breaks out on the plane, and then a naked woman runs across the screen with her, everything jiggling, and I was just like, oh well, hey, hello. So and that's just one example, but we'll be watching things, and I'll be like, oh, hey, we've got some, and I call it a sexy scene. We've got a sexy scene going on here. Maybe don't watch this stuff. So I still tend to be kind of conservative, but I haven't sat down. He's never asked me, where do babies come from? How are babies made? Because I would definitely address it, but I haven't sat down with him and said, let's talk about sex. Let's talk about what it means.
Well, I think you're not alone. In fact, Erin writes, I'll pop that up so you can see it. She says, it's so hard. I know we need to have bigger conversations with my almost 10-year-old. We've talked about how babies are made, but I've never used the word sex. I think that is super common. And I would imagine that this is partially related to this. There are two different conversations. There's, the where do babies come from, and it's very mechanical. And younger kids, that's all they want to know about. They're just curious, really, where do they come from? But then the thing I think that's really awkward for parents to talk about with, slightly older kids is this idea that there's the recreational, fun, pleasure side of sex. And that's really, really hard, especially, depending on what your upbringing has been like, whatever. So I think there are definitely some challenges around that. And I want to be sure to mention before I forget that actually later this month, in a couple weeks, so the AMAZE videos right now are really for 10 to 14-year-olds, but they're coming out with material for parents, for kids who are 4 to 9, and how to address, they're kind of educational videos that are from a sex educator named Debbie Rothman. And it really is to help people figure out, okay, what are little kids just want really basic information, and how do I do that? So, and it sounds like you've been very direct, but, I think it's something that people really struggle with. And even when a little kid asks, where do babies come from? They get all bound up oh gosh, do I have to talk about, pleasure and things like this? This is super awkward.
I just, sometimes I wonder at 11 years old, have I done my son a disservice by not talking about it, because he's never asked me. And I can remember, I have a very distinct memory of 5th grade. We had family life, and we had something called a question box, where if it was a question you were too embarrassed to answer or to ask, you would put it in the question box. And we talked about the sperm and the egg and how it fertilizes, which they don't even talk about that in my son's school. They don't talk about that at all. But we talked about the sperm and the egg and so on. And I remember specifically the question I asked: how exactly does the sperm get to the egg? So that was, so I know that when I was in 5th grade, I had that question. So I know the wheels must be spinning. And again, I don't know what he talks about with his friends at school. I don't know what he's looked at online, but, we're pretty open, and I hope he would ask me if he has questions.
Yeah, this is making me think of a couple of funny things. One, so I think my kids are a bit far apart in age. I have a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old. And I found that with the 7-year-old, she really loves animals. And so any kind of like animal videos, like the real ones, like National Geographic, are quite like, she'll be like, wow, what's that? And I'm like, okay, here we go. So
it's a special hug.
I a teachable moment. I'm like, okay, there we go. But the other thing with older kids I found is like, they get a little more reticent at times, I think. And Laurel especially is a little horrified by the whole, I love talking about sex and stuff. And she's always like, oh my God, please stop.
Stop.
Yeah, please stop. But actually it was interesting because there was a show she wanted to watch. I forget which one it was, but it was one that I knew just from conversations with other parents had like a ton of just sexual stuff in it, high school kind of show. And I said, totally, you can watch that show, but first you and I need to have a conversation about sex first. And she was like, all right, I guess I'll wait.
I'm good. I don't need to watch that.
Yeah, so, maybe I'll catch it later.
That's funny.
So I'd be curious. I have a couple questions for you. I'd be curious. I know you mentioned the Boy's Body book. Are there other resources that you found, helpful as you've, tried to navigate these conversations with your son?
No, the only thing that I've done is, so at school they show this video, and so they invite the parents to come in so we can see before they have this program so that we can see the video. I think that the county I live in does an extremely poor job because the video, it literally is a video, like a video cassette.
Oh, gee.
and I'm watching it going, remember when you have to track it so that the screen wouldn't wiggle and, and they're singing just around the corner, like, cause puberty is just around the corner. So, I mean, we would laugh about it together and we would sort of make fun of it. But I haven't sought out any resources because, again, I've been waiting for him to come to me. And so I will say that one of the things that I did that I didn't think I needed a resource for is, in school they talk the boys about boys' adolescence and they talk to the girls about girls' adolescence. And I think that's a real disservice because I think the boys, speaking as a boy mom, the boys need to understand what the girls are going through just as much as the girls need to understand what the boys are going through. So, I've had conversations with him about, my experience as a girl, as a woman, which is sort of probably awkward for him, but, we at least had that conversation. So a lot of it has been firsthand experience, and he is very good about asking questions from my personal experience. That seems to be what he responds best to. The book I bought on a whim, and I was actually very surprised that he read it. Oh, I do want to say, this is really sort of random and funny, but we're big fans of the show The Goldbergs. I don't know if you've ever seen that show.
No, I'm writing it down. Okay.
It's a sitcom on ABC, and it's about a family. It's based on true life story of a family growing up in the 80s. And Adam Goldberg is the youngest of 3 kids on the show. And if you're a child of the 80s at all, it's a great show. But he goes through puberty during the course of the show. So they address, I mean, in real life as well as on the show. So they address things like body odor, about feelings for girls, about changing voices, and they make it funny. So unintentionally, that's become sort of a, hey, as a family, we sit and watch this show, and then we can be like, that's really what happens. You really do start to stink and sweat a lot or whatever. And, you know, it makes it a lot more relatable to him as well.
I think that's great. And actually, that's like one of the key tips is looking for those just everyday entrance points into a conversation where you're not forcing it too hard, but it's just happening. So that's awesome. I'm curious, one of my last questions to you is, you know, as I mentioned cheerfully at the beginning, you know, it's Pride Month and I'm all Pride every day, but I'd be curious if LGBTQ type topics have come up either at home or, you know, it doesn't sound like it would happen in the curriculum at your school, but I'm just sort of curious if that's come up or anything around gender identity. You know, have you worked through that yet?
So, I mean, I've never sat down and said, some people are gay, some people are straight or whatever, but we've had conversations because it's such a part of, I mean, I write a lot about entertainment, so we see a lot of entertainment together. And, you know, as you're aware, there are a lot of gay characters on TV shows, and it's, you know, it's something that's very much in modern culture. So you can't really ignore it. And I would say I'm definitely more open to it than my husband is. You know, I think he's a little more traditional in that manner. So I don't think that he would talk about it as openly. But for us, it's kind of been like, yeah, you know, some boys like boys and some boys like girls. And we've even talked about bisexuality. And I'm the type of person that I really believe that sexuality is a spectrum. Mm-hmm. So we talk about that. And I have friends that are gay. We have family members that are gay. And so, I mean, we talk about it as if it's, you know, we've never had a let's have a very, you know, it's not an after school special conversation. It's just kind of part of our everyday, like, oh, I think that person is gay, or, you know, or yeah, that's her wife. And it's really interesting because, you know, growing up when I did, it's still, you know, sometimes it still does take me by surprise a little when I'm around very openly gay experiences. I'm going to be honest. It still, it doesn't bother me. It just sometimes, you know, I have to kind of do a mental reset. Like, oh yeah, women have wives and men have husbands. And it's interesting to watch my son. You know, it's like it's just part of his everyday.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is what we want. I mean, that's how thinking changes, and that's how generations change. As long as parents, we don't say, well, back in my day, you know. And I think we kind of learn from our children that way, that this is the new norm. This is part of our society.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think adults are more like bound up in whatever their, you know, issues or upbringing is. Yes. more than kids are. And I will link in the notes or in the comments after this. Our last broadcast was with this awesome children's book author and psychologist named Michael Genhardt, and he has a new book out called Love is Love. And when I was talking to him about it, it was so interesting because he pointed out, and I think I had noticed it sort of subliminally when I read the book, but I needed him to say it out loud for it to really sink in. But he was very, very intentional in frequent usage of the word gay, because it's something, you know, that should become just part of the vocabulary for kids and not a big deal. So I thought that was really cool. So I know I need to let you go. And before I forget, I just want to welcome anybody who's coming to this broadcast later, because I know a ton of people, we always love when people are live and leaving comments. But if you're coming to the broadcast later and you have any you know, questions or comments, please drop them and we'll get back to them later. I'll get back to them. But I would love to close to hear if, you know, there's a key lesson that you've learned or some kind of parting tip or piece of wisdom you would like to leave parents as they're trying to sort out, you know, wade through the awkward and just have those conversations.
Yeah, so I really have two pieces of advice. And one is talk early, talk often. And yes, and I know that, you know, we both followed that mantra when it comes to talking to kids about alcohol or talking to them about drugs. You can have age-appropriate conversations with your kids about many, many adult topics. In fact, I encourage that. And like you said, where do babies come from? Well, I know some parents do it, but I don't know that I would sit down with a 3-year-old and talk about the penis and the vagina. That's just me. But you find a way to talk about it in an age-appropriate way. And then as kids get older, it just becomes a natural part of the conversation. And it makes it so much easier for them to talk to you. So it doesn't have to be your mother and I want to talk to you about, and everyone feels awkward. The other thing, what was the other thing? Talk early, talk often. Oh, and the other thing is that has really worked for me, and that is tap into your own experiences as an adolescent. I mean, we can all think back. I mean, I'm sure some of you sailed through adolescence. Maybe you were the homecoming queen. That was not me. I remember, and it's become a joke with my son how, when I went through that phase where I'm like, nobody likes me, I'm so ugly. And my mom would go, well, I think you're pretty. And I know she had the best of intentions, but at that age, you don't care if your mom thinks you're pretty. So whenever my son is having kind of a down day, a bad day, I jokingly say, well, I think you're pretty. And then we both kind of giggle because we know that I'm trying hard to relate to him. And I tell him stories about when I was younger. And I remember when I went to middle school and I was really nervous. And oh gosh, yeah, trying to get to lockers in between classes. Or, I talked to him about my family life classes and the question box and those kinds of things. So I think helping your kids remember that you were once that age will make it easier for them to talk to you about the big issues that are on their minds.
My mind is a little bit blown because, first of all, I love those 2 closing points. And I feel like one of my favorite people on the AMAZE team is this woman, Nora Gelperin. She's a sex ed expert. I'll link up her Facebook Live. But those 2 points were some of the first things I learned from her. And especially, it's so interesting that the issues are actually all the same right now. I mean, there's some, stuff about gender identity is new and different, and now we have vocabulary for it. But all of the puberty stuff, it's all exactly the same. And one of those key tips that I learned from her was just really remember, you've been there. It was hard for you too. And let that awkwardness help you. In this
It's still awkward, so it works out.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to link to your awesome blog in in the comments later. I'm so thrilled that we got to chat, and thank you for being our first parent voice on. I know this was so great. So thank you guys for joining us, and I think we will be back either next week or the following week with another Facebook Live. So just stay tuned, and thanks so much.